Hello and welcome to the Catholic Information Center. I'm Rosemary Eldridge and I am so excited to be here with our good friend Kate Bryan. She's here to discuss her debut book, Living the Feminist Dream, A Faithful Vision for Women in the Church and the World. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Kate, I encourage you to read the video description below and to pay special attention to the amazing work that she's doing through her organization, One Girl Revolution. Now, you're not here to see me, you're here to see Kate. And Kate, welcome. I want to go ahead and give the screen to you. And please walk us through your novel.
Hi, Rosemary. It's so great to be here. I'm so excited to be back with the CIC community. As many of you know, I moved back to Detroit, Michigan, my home, 3 years ago, and thankfully have still stayed in contact with everybody at the CIC. I've been back for the gala. So I've been able to still be a part of everything that's going on at the CIC. I am so grateful for all the work that you guys are doing at the CIC. And for those of you that are familiar with the CIC, you know what a gift it is to the world. If you're new here, if you're new to the CIC, I encourage you to follow them on social media and visit them in DC. They're working on the CIC right now in DC, but I think in the spring they'll be reopened, and I encourage all of you to go back. Tonight, I'm going to do things a little bit different. As Rosemary shared, I have a new book out called Living the Feminist Dream, a faithful vision for women in the church and the world, if you can see that. And there's a picture of it. So I know that oftentimes the CIC does lectures, and I'm not a lecturer. I don't claim to be an expert. So I really am going to share some of my own personal experiences. I want to share how this book came about. And some of the things that I've experienced as a woman, as a Catholic woman living in the world, and some of the experiences that I've had that have led me to see myself as living the feminist dream. So I'm going to share all of that. I also want to share a little bit about where things have gone since I finished the book. I actually need to do a second edition because I have some life updates, which are really cool. So the concept of this book, Living the Feminist Dream, really sparked during my time in Washington, D.C. I lived there for 6 years and worked in PR and communications. Shout out to my old coworkers and friends at CRC Strategies. It was such a gift to work with them and be a part of their community and the CIC. And I was a Leonine Fellow. So I'm so grateful for my time in DC. But one morning while I was living and working in DC, I stumbled upon two articles that were in the Washington Post about chastity and abstinence. I tell the whole story in the book, but just to give you a little Cliff Notes version, some of you may be familiar with this article because I wrote a response article. Some of you may be familiar with it. Others, you may not know about it. So just to give you a little bit of the Cliff Notes version, I read these two articles. Both were from women who felt betrayed by the evangelical purity culture, which that's a whole nother topic to unpack. I talk about it a little bit in the book, but they blame chastity and abstinence for issues in their lives or difficulties that they faced. I read these two articles and felt like there needed to be a response. There was another story to be told. And I felt like my perspective and the viewpoint and perspectives of so many of my friends about chastity and virtue and faith weren't being presented in these articles. Chastity, as I've come to understand as a Catholic, is the perfection of love. It's a virtue that we're constantly working on. Even married couples, they're working on perfecting the love towards their spouse. And so I felt like that needed to be conveyed, and I wasn't sure how to do it, and I wasn't sure what the article should be. And actually, I didn't even want to write the article. I wanted anyone else under the sun to write that personal article. And so I started asking around, asking friends that worked for the church, could I get anybody to write a response? No, nobody wanted to write it because it was very personal. And I thought about it and prayed about it, and then finally just came to the conclusion where it was like, if nobody's going to write it, I should write it. And the reason that I wrote it was because I didn't feel like my voice, my story, my experience was being presented in the media or presented in these articles. And I think we all have moments where we feel that way, especially looking at the media, working in PR. We hear a lot about media bias or how the media has their own agenda, which can be true. But in my own experience, a lot of times it comes down to asking. Did you ask to write a response? Did you ask for a reporter, or did you share with them a different perspective? And I think oftentimes as Catholics, we don't seek those opportunities, or we don't jump at those opportunities. And so I talk about that a lot. I talked about that a lot in my PR job, but I had an opportunity to actually practice what I preached. And so I ended up deciding to write this article, never thinking that it would run. Interestingly, it got published on September 8th, 2016, which many of you may know is the Blessed Mother's birthday. So I always thought that was profound. But the headline read, "I'm a 32-year-old virgin living the feminist dream." Now, funny story about that title. First of all, I chose that title. The Washington Post asked me what I would want to put as the title. And I thought, well, I may as well call a spade a spade. I may say exactly what I'm saying in this article. And so that's what I ended up sending in, and that's what they published. But funny story, many of you may know Elise Italiano-Urenic, who's a good friend of the CIC. I remember we were roommates at the time, and I remember us crying, laughing because the Washington Post had asked to post a picture of me with that article. And we were just bursting laughing, thinking about like, oh my gosh, all the different pictures we could send, cat lady or girl that lives with her parents, or all of the things that might be perceived as someone of faith who has chosen to live their life in that way. But thankfully, we didn't send any crazy pictures. We sent a normal picture, a somewhat normal looking picture of me to go with that headline and to go with the article. The headline itself was edgy, but I figured other people talk so publicly about their personal lives. Why can't we as Catholics, as Christians, as people of faith also speak out in that way? And I really feel like we have a responsibility to speak up when we are presented with these opportunities. So that article ended up going viral. It was posted in papers and online across the world. And I got so many positive responses, and that's what I always try and focus on. Of course, I got some negative responses as well. But this is really where the book, Living the Feminist Dream, sparked from. About a year ago, Fordham professor and friend of the CIC and friend of mine, Charlie Camosi, reached out to me and told me about this new series that he was creating with New City Press called the Magenta Series. The goal of the Magenta series is simple. They want to bridge the divides in our world and heal polarization and division. There is so much divisiveness and darkness in our world, which we all know so well. Life can feel so isolating. And we need more opportunities to bring people together, to come together, to discuss, to learn from one another, to challenge one another. That's another great gift of the CIC. I feel like there are so many opportunities with the CIC and with this community to bring people together who may not always agree on things, to have discussions, to have debates, and really to be seeking truth, to be seeking the truth in this world. So Charlie shared this concept with this series with me and asked me to be a part of it, and had brought up the Washington Post piece. He was like, I just remember that piece that you wrote, and I loved the concept of living the feminist dream while being a faithful Catholic in the world. And it really was fascinating to a lot of people. And so to me, it's just me. It's how I've lived my life. It's how I've chosen to live my life. But to others, it might be countercultural or edgy, or just might challenge people to stop and think. And so I thought about it, prayed about it, and I just knew that I had to be a part of this incredible project with New City Press and with the Magenta series. And I knew that this book could play some role, no matter how small, on engaging conversation and moving the needle, especially with regards to women in the world and women in the church and women of faith. In this book, I talk about secular experiences, things that I've seen and experienced in the world, but also my perspective on things going on within the church and how we and the church, people of faith, can do better. We have so many opportunities, so many missed opportunities at times, to really reach out to people and to be an example, to be a beacon of light in this world. And so I really feel like we as Catholics have a responsibility to do that. This book is hugely based on my own life experiences. And like I said, I don't claim to be an expert. And you also don't have to agree with me or everything that I talk about in this book. In fact, I hope that you don't. The mission of this book and of the Magenta series is really to engage ideas and conversation, to lead you to think about things in a different way, or maybe just to give you a different perspective, or to open your heart and mind to things that are happening in the world in a different way. Feminism. Okay, so I use the word feminist in the headline, and I used it in the article, and that always gets people kind of turning their head and looking at me in an interesting way. So feminism is used so often in the world, and when I wrote the Washington Post piece, I was attacked for using the word feminism. How can you be a feminist and be talking about chastity? How can you be a Catholic and also be a feminist? I was getting all kinds of feedback like that from women. Again, I also got a lot of positive feedback, which was great. But feminism, that word is thrown around a lot, especially in this culture, especially in this world. But at the very root, what does it mean? Feminism means advocacy for women's equality, treating women as equal human beings. having respect and honor for the unique power and abilities of women that women have and the unique role that they play in the world. Feminism is the embodiment and respect for who and what women truly are. This can be a very secular idea, but to me, my faith, my beliefs, and the way that I've chosen to live my life has provided a path for me to be respected as an equal, freedom to live my life, live the life that I have chosen, and now in my life and work to advocate for the voices and stories of other women and girls. My faith, my beliefs, and the way that I've lived my life has provided me with unique opportunities and abilities that, looking back, I may not have had I lived my life in a different way. Now, this is no judgment to anyone who has chosen a different path or is living their life in a different way or has lived in a different way, but I'm just sharing my own personal experience and my own perspective. To me, I've been able to live the feminist dream not in spite of my faith and beliefs, but honestly, because of my faith and beliefs. Living the Feminist Dream, this book, is a memoir of sorts. There are stories in this book that I knew I would never have the opportunity to tell anywhere else, and I really believe that these stories needed to be told. My hope is that this book helps you, no matter who you are, no matter what your story is or what you believe in, feel less alone in this world and help you to recognize the power and purpose of your story. And I specifically hope that this book empowers and helps women and girls around the world to recognize their unique power and purpose. We all have struggles and things that we have to deal with in our lives, things we've overcome. We all have difficult family and friend situations, and I share a bunch of those in this book. We've also all had moments where we might feel misunderstood, marginalized, or alone. COVID and 2020 are perfect examples of that. So many of us felt isolated and alone, and that can often be how we feel even as people of faith or people that just, stand up for what we believe in. My goal for this book is to challenge the way that you think about your life, the world, the culture we live in, and aspects of our faith even. For example, I talk about the Blessed Mother a lot in this book, which is probably why it's blue, why the cover is blue. And I talk at length about how, contrary to popular belief, I have never seen the Blessed Mother as meek and mild. I see her as fierce, strong, an empowered woman who, in my mind, is the original feminist, the OG. She is an example to all of us of how we should live our lives as women and how every one of us, no matter who we are, should treat the women in our lives and in our society. This book and my life story gives colors to these things that I believe in and things that I've experienced in my faith and the way that I see the church and the way that I see the world. And I hope to write an actual memoir one day, but this would be my intersection of faith and culture memoir if I had to name it. I talk about my early life in this book. So this book really kind of follows. I talk a little bit about the Washington Post article and my experience there. But then I rewind. So I talk about my early life and things that I experienced. And one thing that you'll see is how constant faith was a part of my journey. And I think if we all stop and reflect, and there were many things that came out of this book and me writing this book that I hadn't really sat down and reflected on things that happened throughout my life. So I encourage all of you to take a little time at some point and sit down and just reflect on different things that happened in your life, experiences that you've had, and just reflect on them, because I really my mind was open to a lot of different things, and I was open to I kind of found new ways to see different things that happened with me, or different encounters that I had with people, or debates that I had with people. I kind of found new wisdom through actually just stepping away and taking a moment to sit and reflect on it. So I start with my early life, and I'll share a little bit just about my own life journey, because I think it's important and it's relevant when talking about the feminist dream and talking about where I am today. When I was in utero, I was actually one of a twin. And before I was born, my mom was encouraged to have a D&C, which many of you would know could have ended my life. Knowing that experience, knowing about that experience growing up, and, experiencing that through my parents and their story, it really challenged the way that I think about human life and the sanctity of human life at all levels, at all stages. And so that was a really pivotal point in my life. And I had never really sat down and reflected on like what that meant to me, even though I was in utero as a baby, and some people might not recognize that would play some role in my life. But that's where I start. And then I talk about Job syndrome. So when I was 4 years old, I was diagnosed with a really rare immune deficiency called Job syndrome. Job, after in the Old Testament. So Job suffers greatly, as we all know, and people with Job syndrome are said to suffer greatly. And when I was 4 years old, I was diagnosed. My youngest sister was also diagnosed with it. And there were only 25 documented cases in the world at the time. Now, today, there's only 250 cases in the entire world. And people that have Job syndrome are said to suffer greatly. And we did suffer throughout our lives, but we have it under control, thankfully, now. Shortly after my diagnosis, my dad suffered a traumatic brain injury and nearly died. And then around the same time, my brother was diagnosed with autism. My family came through a lot in those early years, but one thing that was constant, one thing that was always there for us was our faith. And it was truly our faith that brought our family together. Our faith was constant. Growing up, I always had a really strong connection to my faith. My mom would always talk about how some people are just born with a spark for their faith, and she always believed that I was. My rebellion as a teenager was to wear faith-based messages on t-shirts and stir the pot a little bit at family Christmas parties. My car was nicknamed the Chastinator because I had all kinds of messages on the back of my car as a teenager. So I share those things just because it's a funny part of my faith journey, or an interesting part of my faith journey. But the reality is my faith was always constant in my life, and I always had my faith to rely on. Growing up, I was a feisty little kid. My parents would always joke that I would either be the dictator of a small nation or the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Neither of those things have happened thus far, but we'll see what happens in the future. But when I got a little bit older and started school, things completely changed. I got into school and I stopped being that feisty little kid. I stopped talking completely. I wanted to be invisible. And what ended up happening is I was being bullied at school, the typical story. I didn't look like everybody else. My skin was raw because of terrible eczema that I had because of Job syndrome. I would itch my hair out. So people often thought I was going through chemo as a child. And so I suffered a great deal of bullying and abuse and kids being so mean. And I'm sure that that's so many people's experiences out there. My experience is probably not unlike anybody else's, but looking back, I think it was that experience, and obviously I've gone on to speak in front of people, and I've found my magic feather like Dumbo, and have been able to find the person, the little girl that I was born to be, that I was created to be. But looking back, I think that experience and so many of the difficulties that I went through in life really led me to have the courage to speak up, led me to find opportunities when people were suffering or struggling. And even now, things that I'm doing in my work, it led me to have empathy and compassion for people. And those experiences led me to what I'm doing now with One Girl Revolution, highlighting the stories of women and girls that are so often marginalized and ignored. Growing up, alongside of all those other things that were going on, feminism was second nature in my family. My mom, and I tell this story in the book, my mom really was a woman before her time. She was one of the first female telephone installers at what is now AT&T in Michigan. She always fought for what she believed in, stood up for her rights and abilities in a time, the 60s and 70s, when women still weren't given many opportunities. And along with that, she never lost sight of her faith. During that time, you saw so many women that were raised in a faith community that completely turned from their faith and accepted purely secular ideas. And they often blamed their faith or the church, not just the Catholic Church, but all faith communities, for any misfortune or issues that they faced in life. But not my mom. And I know there are so many other women out there who did not stray. She believed that she could truly have it all and that she didn't have to compromise her faith, her morals, or beliefs in order to live out the feminist dream. And now I, as a 37-year-old woman living the feminist dream, I know that to be true. In writing this book, I reflected on so many others in our faith and in the world who blazed a path forward for women. Examples of what it truly means to be a feminist, what it means to be a woman. And I even highlight some incredible men who I believe truly saw the power and dignity of women in the world. Some of those people that I talk about and admired are Rosa Parks, Joan of Arc, Catherine of Siena, Shania Twain. Got to give a shout out to my girl, Shania Twain. John Paul II, Malala, and of course the OG, the Blessed Mother. What my mom and so many others lived out was an example to me and led me to strive to live my life in the same way. You don't have to trade your faith or your beliefs in order to be an empowered woman or a woman of purpose and conviction. And this understanding and belief has definitely been tested and challenged throughout my life, but it's actually fed my soul and gotten me to be even stronger in my faith and what I believe. Throughout my college career, my professional career, and my personal life, I've definitely evolved in my understanding of feminism and what it truly means to be an empowered woman in the world today and in the church. And I think it continues to grow and evolve, which is really beautiful. I graduated from Franciscan University of Steubenville for undergrad, and I often tell people that the best money I ever spent was paying for Franciscan because it taught me to think, which unfortunately is really rare in the academic world today. Through college and after college, I had some really pivotal moments where my faith and culture intersected. I call them suddenly moments. The Washington Post article on chastity was one of those. My college thesis was actually on chastity, so it's interesting how it came full circle when I had this opportunity to write the article. I remember reflecting on and actually going back and reading my thesis to be like, okay, these are things that I want to include. And so it's interesting how life can often come full circle. I tell a few other stories like this in the book. I had a family member when I was 18 years old. I was visiting out in California who literally kicked me out of her house while I was visiting because of my faith and beliefs. And I had never been to California before, and she told me to get out of her house. So that was an interesting moment, but it taught me compassion. And I look back on that story and I share that in this book, that I have compassion for where that family member was coming through. Then when I was or coming from, then when I was 21 years old, I had the opportunity to travel to Austria to go study at Franciscan, and at a family Christmas party 2 weeks before I left, I had another family member, totally different side of the family, that mocked my faith and beliefs and my decision to practice chastity in my life. These experiences, and I share these experiences because we all have these moments in our life, and maybe you aren't living your faith outwardly. Maybe you're just working your 9 to 5 job. You don't want to talk about your faith or what you believe or anything in the public square, and that's okay. I think we're all called in different ways to be examples of the faith and be examples of what we believe, and sometimes it's the quiet ways. I definitely have lived in a more loud way in a lot of aspects of my life. But these experiences, different experiences and encounters and conversations that I've had with people, it's made me stronger, and it's led me to a place of deeper conviction and stronger courage to speak up and to take a stand for what I know to be true. I'm not saying that I'm happy these things have happened, but I have come to believe that sometimes these things happen in our lives to make us stronger for what is to come, and sometimes just to be able to help someone else down the road. And I think some of these stories that I share in the book, I hope that they empower other young women who read these stories and say, oh my gosh, like I had an experience like that, or help them to see that they're not alone. I think we also need to see the value in these moments and become the victor and not the victim of these experiences. Because I think so often in our culture, we're challenged to think about ourselves as victims versus the victors. All of my experiences, that have happened in my life, things I've studied, my work, my family, my friendships, everything has brought me full circle and led me to where I am and what I'm doing today. A couple of things in my life recently that have brought my feminist dream full circle is, first of all, I wrote this book. I overcame a lot of struggles as a child and throughout my life that made me stronger in my faith and even more passionate about the dignity and power of women in the world, and that we can live the feminist dream and not sacrifice our faith and beliefs truly. Secondly, and this is kind of a fun fact, since I finished the book, I actually got engaged in November, which is amazing. Same week that my book came out, which is really exciting and such a gift. And I hope that that is an example to so many people. Like, I wrote this entire book as a single Catholic woman, and I truly believe that that was God's timing, that I needed to write this book about my experiences as a single Catholic woman living in the church and living in the world. As a single Catholic woman, and now to get engaged and now be preparing for marriage is such a gift. And we have to always know that God is working and his timing is perfect. So anyways, I'll have to do a second edition of the book once these life updates really come into fruition. Thirdly, the work that I'm doing through One Girl Revolution, as Rosemary mentioned, I'm the host of the One Girl Revolution podcast and founder of the multimedia platform and nonprofit One Girl Revolution. I founded One Girl Revolution because of the work that I was doing in PR in Washington, D.C. I saw so many opportunities where women's voices weren't being heard. Stories weren't being told in an authentic way. And I wanted to create that space for women to tell their authentic stories. I don't want to tell their stories. I want to give them the space to tell their authentic stories and be the person they were created to be. And these women are changing the world every single day in small ways and big ways. They're doing incredible things to make a difference in the world, and they deserve to be highlighted. And in this world that's often so dark, we need to be focusing on the positive things that are happening in the world. Again, not to keep talking about COVID, but I just was so touched by the first couple of months of COVID, how people dropped everything to help their neighbors. And that's what we need to be doing as Catholics. That's what we need to be doing as human beings, looking out for our fellow brothers and sisters and taking care of them and making a difference in the world. And it's the little things that matter just as much as the big things. You don't have to start an organization or some big movement to make a difference. Sometimes it's just the little things, how we live our life, a smile at someone in the coffee shop, or just, being there for someone in need. One Girl Revolution also released a short documentary called The Girl Inside, where we actually got to take a film crew into Cook County Jail, which is another instance where these women are so often forgotten about and marginalized. And I found myself reflecting on my early life, moments where I felt ignored and marginalized and forgotten about. And we gave these women, these incredible women, space to tell their story and highlight their purpose and their power, and not what they did to end up in Cook County Jail, but who they are as individuals, who they are as people. What is their purpose? What is their value? What were they created for? What is the goodness they were created for? So I encourage all of you to check that out. It's called The Girl Inside, and it's on One Girl Revolution's website. Again, this is where my life comes full circle. From my early years, it feels like I was silenced and marginalized and excluded. And throughout my life, I know what it feels like to be judged, and judged often for not who you are, but who people think you are. And we know that very often with our faith, where people might be like, oh, you're Catholic, and make assumptions about who they think we are instead of actually getting to know who we are and what we believe. And in all of these things included in everything that I share in this book, everything has come full circle. I want to get to know the human being in front of me, who you are, where you're from, what you believe, and truly who you are. And I think that that's so important for us to think about in our individual lives, not have these labels in our head about who we think somebody is, but actually ask them questions about their life. I want to encounter the human being in front of me in an authentic way. And I think we all have those experiences and opportunities every single day. Like I said, I don't claim to be an expert, but I can share what I know to be true and share my own experiences, which is what I've done through this book. And I hope is what I've done a little bit tonight in this experience. I'd like to close on a couple of things, a couple of just resonating themes from the book, things that I was reflecting on when thinking about this amazing community that we're all a part of. And that is, one, you don't have to compromise your faith and beliefs in order to live out your dreams. You don't. You can do all things. Let my mom be an example to you. Let the Blessed Mother be an example to you. Let Shania Twain or John Paul II or whatever, all the different people. Think about people that you admire. And the reality is there's so many examples of women in the church, women in the world, individuals in the world. It's not just about women either. It's everybody. We all have the power to change the world through our lives, and we can do all the things. And you don't have to compromise your faith or beliefs in order to live out your dreams. Number two, we have a responsibility as Catholics, and I say this numerous times in the book. We have a responsibility as Catholics, as Christians, to speak up and to be a voice for those who are often marginalized. We have so many opportunities to be a good example, but we have a responsibility to be an example of what it means to be Catholic, what it means to be a person of faith, what it means to be the embodiment of what we stand for and what we believe every single day. We need to be examples. And so when I was a little girl, my grandfather told me, before we leave the house, he would be like, you guys can do whatever you want in the house. You can fight each other, you can punch each other, you can yell, you can scream. The second you leave this house, You are the embodiment of what you believe. You are the embodiment of your Catholic faith. You are the embodiment of what this family stands for. You are the embodiment of this family name. And so you better be well behaved. And I think about that in my life today. How can I be a better example? How can I be a better example to the people that I work with? How can I be a better example to the people that I'm paying for gas next to? How can I just be a better person in the world? And so as Catholics, as Christians, as people of faith, we have a responsibility to be an example to the world. And I'll leave you with, and I know we're going to have some time for question and answers. I'm sure that there are a bunch of questions out there, and I know Rosemary has a couple too already, but I want to leave you with these wise words. So I have a couple of people that I quoted, but I'll leave you with these quoted in the book, but I'll leave you with these wise words from one of my favorite feminists, a woman named Dolly Parton, who many of you hopefully love. But she says, find out who you are and do it on purpose. And I think that that's so important for us. Life is a journey. We're all on this journey in our faith lives. We're all on this journey through life. But we have a responsibility to find out who we are and do it on purpose and embrace it and strive to be the best person we possibly can be. I often think about our fingerprint. You know, we are so unique. We are so unique. And I encourage each of you right now to think about your unique purpose, your unique mission in this world. We are so unique. We are as unique as our fingerprint. There is no one in this world that is ever going to be like you, who is going to leave the imprint that you will leave. So think about your fingerprint. Leave that imprint on this world except for you. So find out who you are, find out who you were meant to be, do it on purpose, and be the best possible version of yourself that you can be. So I will open it or switch it back over to Rosemary for the questions and answers.
There we go. Here
Okay, I was like, I can't hear you.
Had some technical difficulties there. Sorry about that. So let me just repeat what I just said. Thank you for joining us, for everyone tuning in live right now. If you have a question, please use the YouTube chat box if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're watching on Facebook, you can just leave a comment in the Facebook Live video. We have a viewer who's wanting you to express your, define your definition of feminism again. I know you touched on that at the beginning, and I want to add like a second part to that question, because I think something that we see in the culture today, especially around sensitive topics such as like feminism or gender or any type of political topic that, you know, crosses into our culture, is the inability to agree on the definition itself. So how do you navigate, you know, in this book you talk about how you want this to be a conversation starter. How can you have a conversation if you're not even able to agree on what the definition of feminism is? So how would you approach that based on your experiences?
Yeah, so I think it is an interesting word, and a lot of times it does stoke these interesting conversations where sometimes people are like, we just have to agree to disagree. But if you look it up in the dictionary, which I've done numerous times, even whenever I'm preparing for something like this, look it up just to make sure that it hasn't changed. But it's advocacy for women's equality, and I think that can mean a lot of different things. But to me, it's treating women as equal human beings, having respect and honor for their unique power and abilities that women have, and the unique role that they play in the world. I think a lot of people have taken like a particular aspect of feminism and run with it. I mean, we could talk about, and I do talk about Betty Friedan's book in my book, and just kind of how feminism was redefined ultimately, but at the heart, it's always going to mean the same thing. And so we need to remember to get back to the heart of it. And people might disagree with us, but when you look at the world, or you look at people that are promoting a certain aspect of what they claim to be feminism, you know, they pick a particular issue and they take it and run with it and say, how can you be a feminist if you don't believe in X, Y, or Z. I'm not going to point to a specific issue just because everybody who's here, you're going to have a different thing that you're going to be thinking about. But I think it's important for us to say, well, look at the world and what has that particular issue done for women? Is that actually empowering women? A lot of times, no. And so if you get down to the root of it, we need to focus on treating women as equal human beings and having respect and honoring them. You look at, I think about the Me Too movement all the time, and really what happened there, or what has happened in so many instances where women are disrespected, women are abused, women are taken advantage of, is people have lost respect for the individual that's sitting right in front of them. And so in conversations with people, that's what I always bring it back to. And I've definitely had instances where people are like, well, that's not how I see feminism. But if you bring it back to specific examples of, okay, look at this, the Me Too movement in the culture, like what was the cause of that? The cause of that was individuals lost sight of the human being that was right in front of them, from my perspective and how I see it. And I think that most people would agree with that. And so we need to bring it back to the human being story instead of talking about politics or these issues, but really get to the root of the human story. And women deserve the same respect that everyone does, and they deserve respect and honor.
Great. Since your book has come out in November, have you had anybody reach out to you who felt, that they had a change of heart on any issues that you touch on in your book?
That's a really good question. I've had a lot of people reach out for different things that I talk about in there. And I give a lot of cultural examples of things that I saw. I love pop culture, so I give a lot of pop culture references. I also talk about a lot of things in the church. One thing that I've heard from a lot of women who have read the book of all different ages is there are things in the book where they feel like they were finally seen or heard, or they kind of had these attitudes of like, I experienced that as well. And so like one of the things, and I didn't talk about it tonight, but one of the things that I talk about in one of the chapters is women's place in the church. And I think a lot of times there are discussions about like, women need to be a part of like all the big discussions at the top level of the church. But in my own experience, colors this is I see there are numerous demographics of women throughout that are in the church. And you could say that about the world as well. So you have like, your young people that are in youth group and have a place to hang out, and they have a good community. Then they go to college, they get out, and they're kind of like a part of like Young Catholic Professionals or the Catholic Information Center. The Catholic Information Center is great, shout out. They are such an amazing community for people of all different ages. So this is not about the CIC or other groups out there that are really serving a lot of demographics. But I see there are like young women, there are all these places for young women to hang out. Then you have like the mommy and me groups, or, the older retired, prayer groups for women. But there's this demographic, and my life right now, even I'm sitting in this demographic of 25-year-olds to 50-year-olds who aren't married, who don't have kids, or maybe they are married and they don't have children. I mean, we all have so many friends that have struggled with infertility or aren't able to have children for numerous reasons. Where do they go? Like, where is their community? And so I think that we need to do a better job as a church, as sisters, as brothers, people that are out there as brothers of women, like creating community for that kind of interesting middle ground of demographic. And guys probably experience this too. I'm obviously just speaking from my own personal experience. So I have gotten an overwhelming amount of women who have reached out and said, thank you for saying that, because there needs to be a discussion on that specific thing within the church.
We have another audience question, which I think is a really great one. Kate, this is from Michael New. Kate, I appreciate your great work with various pro-life and Catholic groups over the years, and looking forward to reading the book. Could you tell me when the movie is coming out? I love that.
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I don't know if there's going to be a movie, but I mean, I don't know if there's going to be a movie. We'll see. Hopefully this will be a part of I think that this is definitely a story that's still being written. And I'm so grateful for you, Dr. New. Thank you so much for that comment. And I'm excited for you to read the book. And I think you'll particularly really be interested in a lot of the stories that I share from my time in DC and working in PR and, conversations I had with reporters and just different experiences I had in my professional career and even from a faith perspective. But yeah, I don't know when the movie's coming out. I don't know. I haven't no Hollywood phone calls yet. So we'll see.
But this is a good segue into another question that we have from an audience member. How can men help the women in their lives to find their purpose without coming off as patronizing?
I think it's very situational. So I would say like it kind of depends on the situation. I think it's a great question. And I encourage all the men who are out there to look for opportunities without being patronizing, but look for opportunities where you can just really encourage women in their hopes and dreams. I know myself, like when I moved back to Detroit, I had so many amazing girlfriends and guy friends that were reaching out to me and just being incredibly supportive. Like, hey, and a lot of times I felt like I was kind of doing everything alone because I moved back. I had my amazing community in DC and moved back to Michigan. I have some friends here and some family here, but I really felt like I was kind of chasing my dreams alone. And so I think number one, we can all be supportive. We can all be supportive of the women in our lives. If they have a dream, I think about stay at home moms, even like stay at home moms have hopes and dreams too. And so, like, if you're a husband, if you're a brother, if you're a friend, encourage those women to chase their dreams. If there's something you can do to support them, whether it's, helping them build a website or whatever you're good at doing, like, just support them in it. And I think support is a really important word. Um, encourage women, encourage women if they are sharing an experience or sharing a perspective on something. We'll use the Washington Post article as an example. If one of the women in your lives is sharing her perspective and you think it's really interesting, encourage her to write it. Like, encourage her to start a blog or encourage her to write the Washington Post and ask if they would publish a counter article to something that she read. I think that we need to, and women ourselves, we need to look for those opportunities and embrace those opportunities and jump at those opportunities. But I think that men can play a huge role in encouraging and supporting women. And if there are young girls in your life, if you have daughters, friends, nieces, friends, kids, I think that we need to do a better job of empowering young women to use their voice, to speak up for what they believe in, and own their gifts and talents. Not all of us are made in the same way. I think a lot of times, even me going to Franciscan, I studied theology, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, cool! You're going to either become a nun or you're going to become a theology teacher." And I just was interested, and so. I think just supporting girls and chasing their dreams. And if they're interested in art, like maybe that's not your dream. Maybe your dream is for them to go to Princeton or wherever else, but like encourage them, because we need women in every single space of this world. We need women to bring beauty, to bring hope, to bring light to the world. So yeah, support and encourage are the two words that come to mind.
On that note, and this is just something that I've observed through my lived experience, and I'm curious if you've observed this as well. So in our culture, especially on social media, in Hollywood, and even in books, on its surface, it does seem like women are very strongly supported and held up, almost like on pedestals a little bit. And yet you talk about, and I myself has felt that I'm not actually supported, even though, you know, everything that I'm seeing online is saying that women are great and, we have each other's back. And yet in our lived experiences and lives, we don't feel that. So what do you think? One, is this something that you've noticed as well? And then two,
Mm-hmm.
how can we, like, what's the missing piece here? Like, what are we missing that's not connecting this um, outward narrative to what everyone's experienced inwardly?
Yeah, I think substance is missing hugely from our world. And you could say that about a lot of different things. But when you're talking about feminism or you're talking about women in the world, I think there are a lot of organizations or individuals that claim to speak for women, claim to be empowering women. But what are they actually doing, right? Like, if you dig down, like, are they actually going out and doing volunteer work for organizations? Is a percentage of their profits, if they have owned a company, is a percentage of their profits going to actually support marginalized women and their children? Most likely not. Like the majority of people that are really loud in the world with regards to women, at least in my own experience and from what I've seen, they're kind of speaking a good game and saying like, let's empower women, and like, oh, look at like women are standing together. Women are actually like so empowered, but there's not substance to what's actually changing in the culture. Whereas on the flip side, I see so many individual women that might be quieter. I see that in my work that I'm doing every single day, where they might just be like, hey, I had this idea to help women or do something. And so they might not be seen as like this big organization who has a lot of power, but they're actually making change. Like they're legitimately making opportunities for women. They're creating opportunities for women. They're making things better for women. They're just giving women the space to be the people, the individuals that they were created to be. And so I think you're right, Rosemary. I think that there are instances where, and we can feel isolated too. I think it's important for us to recognize that, own that, surround ourselves with great women. I interviewed a woman on One Girl's podcast, Brooke Baldwin, who used to be on CNN, and she has this book called Huddle, and it's all about bringing women together. Like, let's huddle and support one another. And we might disagree on things, right? Like, you might not agree with all of your friends, but let's support one another. And so I think it can feel really isolating as women, and things can feel more difficult. I think that there are still a long way that we have to go in the culture and in the world. And you probably in certain instances could talk about the church too. We have a long way to go for women to actually be in their rightful place. And so but there's a way to go about it. And I think that we need to have more discussions like what we're having right now, and like how do we, and maybe a deeper discussion on like how do we actually solve what's going on in the world and make sure that women aren't forgotten about, that they aren't ignored, that their voices get heard, that their stories get heard, and that they have the actual opportunities. I think as women, a lot of times, and I know even for myself, like a lot of times I'm like, I don't know where to go. Like I'm doing all these things. And even right now, I have like certain things that are going on with that right now in my own work, where it's like, okay, what steps do I take? And where do I go? And I don't know how you solve that, but it definitely starts with all of us being like, hey, I see this woman doing amazing things. What can I do to support her? Or you, Rosemary, like being at the CIC, like people reaching out to you and being like, hey, I love what you're doing. What can I do to get involved? Like all of us can do a better job of supporting women and actually like practicing what we preach. So not being the person that posts all about, empowering women on social media like so many other people are doing, but actually like, what can I do in my own community? What can I do in my own life to empower women, to support women, and, to encourage them?
I love that. It's sort of like going beyond the keyboard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, so we have a listener whose question is, what are your thoughts on the single vocation, on where you consecrate your life to Christ without joining a movement or religious order? That's the question.
Mm. That's a really beautiful question. I think it's so beautiful. I think that there are so many different ways that we are called to live out our vocation, and it's not just, um, you know, a vocation in the Catholic sense, I guess I would say, or in that sense, but also in everything, right? Like in our jobs and everything. Like whatever you feel called to do, I think there's so much beauty in that. And I just would encourage you. And I know myself, when I was writing this book, I wrote the entire book before I even like thought I would meet this amazing man. And it's just really cool to see. I just had written and said, like in the book, like I very well might be single the rest of my life. And maybe that's what God's calling me to. And I think there's a beauty in it too, where you're more available to serve family members, you're more available as a single person, you're more available to be there for friends and family and your community. And so I think that we need to talk about that more in the world, that is such a beautiful and honorable vocation. And so I just encourage you, I'll be praying for you in your discernment, but I think it's really beautiful.
I couldn't agree more with your answer on that one. So, at the beginning of your remarks, you talk about how when you were writing this, you're hoping it would start a conversation and that it would touch people's lives. How has writing this book touched your life?
That's a great question. It's touched my life in so many different ways. Like I mentioned, it challenged me to actually sit down and be just be, look at my life in a different way, look at things that had happened. I share some really difficult things that I overcame and even conversations. And so it challenged me to sit down, which I had never done in my life. Like I'd thought about things, we have experiences, especially if you've been to therapy or confession, you know very well that there are things that you sort of carry with you throughout your life. And that, kind of become a part of your story. And so some of these stories that I share in the book really have become a big part of my story and helped form me into who I am and who I've become and who I'm becoming. Um, but it challenged me to sit down and look at those stories. And it was so freeing in a lot of ways to sit down and like look for purpose in each of the stories. And it definitely changed my life in so far as like it brought me deeper in my faith life, my faith journey. It brought me to look at my own life in all kinds of new ways. It helped me bring these full circles that I was talking about. Like even I had never really connected the work that I'm doing now, or even this book, to my childhood and the moments when I felt silenced and ignored and marginalized. And so I think it was the process of writing this book that actually got me to see my purpose, my own purpose as an individual, as Kate Bryan, living in the world, living in the life, living in the church. Got me to look at my purpose in a new way and find new value there. And yeah, I still feel like it's a continuing journey because it's opened up a lot of things that I've been thinking through just about my life. And now going into this next chapter of my life, getting married and having a family, what are things that I experienced that I don't want to continue? And what are things that I want to make sure never happen to my children or my children's children? And so I just think that the whole experience of writing a book, it was a lot of work, as you can imagine, and took a very long time, but I'm just grateful for that experience, and it changed my life, and I'm excited to see where it goes from here, because I don't think this is the end. I mean, it's a very like short, anybody who can see, it's like a very thin book, so it's very easy read, and that was there was purpose behind that. I wanted it to be an easy read, so anybody could pick it up, and it wouldn't be super heady. It would just be kind of real. So yeah, I think it's still in process or progress, but yeah, learned a lot about myself.
So obviously, we want everyone to go and pick up their copy of this book and take the time to read the book. But in reality, we also know, especially as women, that our lives are busy, and sometimes we don't have time, the time that we want to sit down and read the book. So for those who are watching, who have all intentions to read this book, but find themselves caught up in their daily life, what message do you want to leave with them the most?
I would say, with regards to this book, and this is for women, this is for anybody who's out there watching, listening, I would say that each and every one of us, are so unique, and you were created for a purpose. Your life has value. And it can be easy in this world, in this day and age, especially with social media and the news, media, so many things that are going on in our lives. It can be so easy to kind of get caught up in that and feel isolated and feel alone, and start to kind of go down this path where you feel like, why am I even doing this? Why am I even going to work? Why am I even like trying with this person if I'm, having difficulties in a friendship or something? But we all have a purpose. And so you need to pull yourself out of that. And whatever you need to do, whether it's going to a church and sitting there, I definitely have had those instances where it's like I kind of feel like I've lost sight of who I am and what I'm supposed to be. And like pulling yourself out and going and sitting in the church, or sitting down and like writing about, different good things that have happened in your life, or experiences like I did in this book, experiences that you had that really formed you into who you are, good or bad, right? Like we all have good and bad experiences in our life. And so there are so many different things that we can pull from, and so many things that make us uniquely who we are. And so I would say to everybody who's out there, you have a purpose, you have a mission. God created you and has big plans for you. I don't know what they are, whether it's, living the consecrated life, whether it's living out in the world, whether it's getting married, having children, not having children, whatever it is, you're the only person, you and God are the only ones that can figure that out and discern together. But you were made for a purpose. You are loved more than you could even imagine. And I can't wait to see where your life goes from here.
Kate, can't think of a better. That was a very hopeful message. I definitely feel so inspired by your story. You know, I'm still reading this book, and I'm very excited to finish it. Um, and I can't think of a better or a more positive note for us to end on. Thank you again for taking the time out of your life, for being called to writing this book, for sharing your personal life with us in a way, in hopes to inspire the next generation of women. So thank you again so much. It's been wonderful having you, and we wish you all the luck in all your future endeavors. And for everyone watching, be sure to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this conversation, which I 1,000% know you did, please share it with your friends and family so that they can enjoy the conversation as well. And thank you so much.